So then let's go ahead and turn directly to the argument, which is the argument we're discussing today is the ontological argument. When I first came across this argument, I originally thought, well, there's probably something tricky going on here. It seems too easy. And then after I looked into it, I was like, this is a really strong argument, actually. And then as I kept looking into it and I looked at objections, I eventually came to the attitude that I don't know. I don't know anymore. And so I want to hear what's your favorite formulation of the argument, and then how do you go about defending it?
Very good. Well, it's important that you mention your favorite formulation because there's not just one ontological argument. There are lots of ontological arguments. And there are ontological arguments for the existence of all kinds of things, but you and I are interested in ontological arguments for the existence of God or for the existence of a supreme being. And I think that the ontological argument is a successful argument, at least in certain formulations. Now, St. Anselm of the 11th century was kind of the first person to stumble across the argument and articulate it. And he said that God is the greatest conceivable being. Whatever it is greater to be than to not be, that's who God is. And for him, as he's reflecting on this in the proslogion, it's a giant prayer. So he's praying and starting to think about God and just tries to have these high thoughts, and he's reflecting on the existence of God and starts to think not only about the fact that God exists, but how God exists. That God is the kind of being that he's so wonderful and so grand and so marvelous that he couldn't fail to exist, is the claim. Now, for Anselm, all of this hinges on conceivability. And that makes it, in a certain sense, an epistemic argument as much as it is an ontological argument. And I have concerns about his formulation of the argument as to whether or not it's successful. But fast forward 900 years, and here we are in the 21st century. And in the late 70s, Alvin Plantinga developed an argument that's now called the modal ontological argument. And it doesn't trade on the conceivability premise that Anselm's argument did. He said, not that God is the greatest conceivable being, but that God is the greatest possible being. Whether you and I can think about it or not, that's an ancillary question to the idea that something that's out there, of all the extant stuff, something is the greatest. Think of it as like a food chain, right? Something's at the top of the food chain, or something's at the top of the totem pole. And he thinks God is that. But not just that there's something out there that's at the top of the food chain, but that whatever actually is at the top of the food chain, it's not possible that that there be anything greater than that. And that whole idea is baked into the definition of who God is. So I've got more to say about that, but do you have any questions about what we've got right here?
No. I'm just I'm curious about the steps. So is that the version that you defend?
Well, so the modal ontological argument is the version that I think is going to be the most successful.
Okay. So what let's just lay out sort of the basic steps of the argument so that listeners can sort of follow along.
Right. Okay. So the modal ontological argument trades on various conceptions of the metaphysics of modality, and we get into talking about possible world theory. And this is tricky. It's complicated. There's lots of different ways of thinking about possible worlds. In the contemporary literature, things seem to be decidedly in favor of a Plantingian approach to possible worlds, wherein when we talk about possible worlds,
we're not thinking about a possible universe, right?
That's right. So yeah, that's very important. This is not
an alternate reality.
Alternate realities, no, but they are ways of thinking about how things could have been. Now, before we turn our attention to the ontological argument, I think it's very important that we understand that there are these three different kinds of modal claims: impossibility, contingency, and necessity. And the way that we understand these is going to function importantly in the way that I want to defend the argument. To claim that something is impossible or to claim that something is necessary, that's a very strong claim.
Right.
But to claim that something is possible, that's not a very strong claim. I kind of think that we should default towards thinking that something is possible unless we have a good reason to know that it's not possible.
That's interesting.
Which would mean that it's impossible, which is a stronger claim. So Okay, so now jumping into the ontological argument, right? And just sketching it out very quickly. The key premise of the whole argument is just this. Maybe God exists. Maybe. Possibly God exists. It could be the case that God exists.
Right.
As long as you're there, as it turns out from the very definition of God, we get God existing. Because this, to state it formally, possibly maximal greatness is instantiated, right? Means that there is a possible world. It might not be this one. There's some possible world out there where maximal greatness is exemplified.
Okay.
Now, if that's the case, we just need to think about the concept of maximal greatness. And here, Anselm informs us that it's not just that God exists that makes him great, but the mode in which God exists also makes him great. So, God exists in some possible world out there, but we need to ask ourselves, is it better that God exists in some but not all worlds? Or would it be better for God to exist at all possible worlds? Would it be better that the modality with which God enjoys existence isn't a contingent existence, but a necessary existence? And I think just upon reflection, you would think, yeah, like a maximally great being would exist, not just accidentally or not just contingently, but of necessity. So if there is a world in which God exists in that world and God is maximally great in that world, then that world actually tells us about the whole modal landscape. It tells us something about all possible worlds. And it tells us that in all of those possible worlds, God exists.